Hi, welcome. so, here am I talking about The Gift of Rain by Tan Twan Eng, which was actually the first book that I finished in 2022. So, yeah, that is sort of a milestone in and of itself. Yeah, The Gift of Rain. Actually, I started reading this book last year, some months ago, but for some reason I was really slow with it, particularly in the first chapter. I was really slow with the first chapter, and yeah, I guess I was just not exactly in the mood. And then by the end of the year, I started to accelerate my reading of this book, and yeah, I managed to finish it in the first week of 2022, I guess. And I must say that this book is I don't think it is as good as the second novel by this author, Tan Twan Eng. The second novel being The Garden of Evening Mist, which is one of my most favorite novels of all time. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that novel a few times in my some of my past booktube videos. I love that novel, and in fact that novel was the one that sort of prompted me to try even more works by other Malaysian authors. So yeah, that book was really good, totally a 5-star. This one, I wouldn't say that it's a 5-star. On Goodreads I rated it 4 stars, but that's only because Goodreads have this like really simplistic way of allowing us to rate our books, 1 to 5. It's really simplistic. It sort of ignores all nuance of ratings. But anyway, I gave it 4 stars. But there are some parts that I consider to be kind of enjoyable, but at the same time there are certain parts that I feel like it's a little bit clumsy, and sort of shows that this book is in fact a debut novel. It is. But yeah, the premise of The Gift of Rain. So this one is a historical fiction, and it takes place sometime in 1940s Malaya, and it was around that time. The Japanese occupation actually occurred sometime in 1941. So 1940s. It actually began sometime in 1939, I guess, in this book. And so at the time, it was just a couple of years before the Japanese occupation of Malaya. And we have this main character. His name is Philip Hutton. Now, Philip Hutton, he lives in Penang, and he's actually someone of mixed descent. He is British-Chinese. His father is British, and his mom is Chinese. And so the deal with him is that he's actually the youngest son in his family, and he is the only one. He's the only son of his father's second wife. He has other siblings as well, 3 other siblings, but they were actually his half siblings. His older siblings are of British descent. The mom is also British, and so Philip has always felt like he's kind of like an outsider in his own family. He's very introverted. He's very quiet, and he feels like he does not fit in with his family. So he's sort of a misfit kind of a character. And one day he meets with this older guy named Endo, Hayato Endo, and he's an older Japanese man. He's somewhere in his 40s, whereas Philip at the beginning of this story is somewhere in his I think he's 16 years old, somewhere in his teen years, late teen years. And so he meets Endo, and they sort of forms a friendship together. And Endo happened to be a Japanese who was living there at that time, for whatever reason. That whatever reason will be revealed later in this book. But yeah, at the beginning they sort of form a friendship, and then Endo sort of becomes Philip's Aikijitsu trainer. So he teaches Philip how to do martial arts, and it is through that their relationship sort of becomes closer and closer. And like I said earlier, at that time also was sometime before the Japanese occupation, but the characters, especially Philip, didn't know anything about it. And sort of when the time actually came for the Japanese army to invade Malaya, it sort of became like a shocking moment for Philip, because now he is befriending a Japanese, but at the same time his country is being invaded by Japanese army. And so he sort of has to make a choice whether he wants to stay loyal to his friend, or if he wants to remain loyal to his country and his family. Now, another layer of context in here is that, which I think really makes this book even more interesting and colorful, is that around that time there has always been this sort of enmity that exists between the Japanese and also the Chinese, mainly because of the history that sort of happens in China around that time. Before that, when the Japanese attacked China, and so there has always been this kind of mistrust and distrust, and also a bit of bad blood between the Chinese and also the Japanese. And Philip, being someone who is a half Chinese himself, him befriending a Japanese at that time also sort of aroused some suspicions among the local community in Penang, and everyone was sort of like feeling it to be kind of suspicious that he is he's a very good friend of the Japanese, and so this actually introduces an additional layer to the kinds of conflict that Philip has to face later on when the Japanese actually invades Malaya. And now not only he has to choose between his friend or his country, but at the same time there's also this thing going on with his identity, how I mentioned earlier that he feels like a misfit in his own family, being someone of mixed heritage. And at the same time now he is befriending a Japanese, and at the same time he is also someone who is half Chinese, and at the same time he is also half British, and that also introduces a totally different baggage to him. So he has so much baggage in terms of from different kinds of sources, being someone who sort of exists between different worlds, so to speak. And that is actually going to be like a real big theme in this book, because the main character is portrayed as someone who does not exactly fit nicely in one particular area in society. He is a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and because of his identity, he, in his sort of internal conflict in choosing a side, he is also having this kind of internal conflict in which he is trying to figure out who he is. And it's just that the main idea is that in the process of doing so, not everyone is going to understand why you do certain things. And so I think that this novel sort of explores that really nicely. It explores the how certain people are motivated by certain things, but other people may not necessarily understand the motivation behind what you're doing. They some people are bound to misunderstand what you're doing, and it's only because they may not understand where you're coming from. And I think that one is written quite nicely, in this book. So yeah, I really like the aspect of the character making a choice. I've always liked that kind of stuff, and it's always really intriguing to see like how the author would take the character, and how they would take the character into like deliberating which kind of choice that they would want to make. What are the options that they have. And usually from the back cover of the book or the inside cover of the dust jacket, the readers would sort of think that maybe there are only two choices. But typically in books like these, I would say that authors would tend to choose like authors are the creative people, so they would go for something that is beyond those two choices. And it's always really interesting to see how the author takes that. And for me, that is kind of like why I like these kinds of stories, stories about choices. I just read another book recently as well, also about choices, which I will probably talk about later in a different video. Very different from this one. That was My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. But yeah, back to this book. This is a story about choices. It's a really wonderful, I really like the resolution when it comes to the choice. One thing that I feel that is not really jiving well with me in this book is how the portrayal of Asian culture sort of feels a little bit mythical, a little bit mystical, a little bit exotic. Now it's really strange because this book is actually written by an Asian author, a Malaysian author, and somehow I feel that reading a historical fiction that takes place in Penang, which is a place that I visited only once, somehow it sort of gives that place an aura of an exotic aura, which is sort of strange because I know that this story takes place like 70 to 80 years ago or so, but still I don't think that just because it's a historical fiction it needs to have that exotic aura to it. It feels kind of strange because as an Asian myself who live in Malaysia, I never see my own surroundings as mystical or exotic. I might sense like some kind of personal magic around me, but not in such a way that it feels foreign or it feels exotic. I use that word a lot, but yeah, I think there are certain parts of Asian culture, or I would say Asiatic culture, that is sort of exoticized, or even slightly romanticized in here. And one of my pet peeves in books is romanticization of cultures. And it doesn't matter what kind of culture that is. If the culture is romanticized, I don't like it. It feels weird. That said, I won't say that the cultures in here are really romanticized. Just slightly, so still digestible to me. I can still accept it. So yeah, those are kind of like the main things I want to say. I actually have another thing that I kind of want to mention about this book, and I find really interesting. Really interesting, mainly because I actually sort of, sometimes I would see it in people's reviews, right, of this book. But often I feel that it is absent from people's reviews. And it's sort of, it feels very perplexing because I think that this element is really obvious it feels like this author is trying to push this element in this book, but at the same time the author is also trying to pull it back, like holding it back. So there is some kind of strange tension going on in this book regarding this particular subject. And it's also really strange because many reviewers sort of omits it, even though I think that it is really obvious. And that is, I think this book is a story about a queer relationship. It's about a gay relationship. And for me, based on the writings in this book, especially the writings that describe the relationship between Philip and Endo, it is very obvious that these two are romantically attracted towards one another. And, but at the same time, it's not actually like explicitly mentioned that they are really attracted to one another, although there are parts in which they say that they love each other. But of course, a naysayer would probably say that, friends can say that they love each other as well. And so, when they say they love each other, I would say that, yeah, maybe they do have some kind of romantic feelings from those expressions, but those are not the places in which I sort of decide and say, yes, they have romantic feelings towards one another. It's more from how the author describes their relationships in other places. Like, for example, there are times when there is a part in which the author actually describes how one character takes in the breath of another character, and the other character also does the same. And that's kind of strange for a normal friendship. I mean, maybe that's just me. I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm not antisocial, but I'm not really sociable. I'm not really social. So maybe that's what regular friends do. Who knows? But for me, it feels like it feels very suggestive. And then there's also another part which I think is really interesting, and I just kind of want to find this sentence. This particular sentence, it's not really spoilery, but I just kind of want to read it to you. So this is what Endo says to Philip after he teaches one of the so-called meditation skills in aspects of the martial arts, and he says this to him. I find it really, like, it is so subtle, as if someone is punching you in the face. Now you will always remember me as the man who taught you to touch heaven, he said. So yeah. I mean, to be fair, the meditation that he is teaching Philip about that, at that place, is sort of about how, it involves something about touching heaven. But, I would think that it's really strange to ignore the really obvious double entendre over there. This one is also interesting. I'm just sort of flipping it through, and I found this one like really interesting passage. I just kind of want to read it to you. Okay, so this is the scene in which one of the characters, Philip has a hand injury, and so he's struggling to eat, and he's having dinner with Endo, and this is how they have their dinner. It was only after I sat down that I realized my injured hand was incapable of working the pair of chopsticks. I placed them heavily on the table, and the saucers and soy sauce container rattled. His eyes met mine, and he moved in closer to me. He deftly picked up a sliver of salmon and held my chin with his hand as he placed it into my mouth. I chewed it slowly, my eyes never leaving his. Oh my gosh. He laid his chopsticks neatly on my table and took a drink of tea. This is the breath passage. There was only the sound of the pot bubbling over the hearth. He was so close to me that each breath he expelled, I took, and every breath that I surrendered, he possessed. I waited for him to continue, to quieten the sudden turmoil within me. As I heard his breathing, I knew the next step would be dependent on me, and so, putting my feet firmly on the path I would take, I leaned forward and received another offering from his hand. That moment notched the beginning of our relationship, our real relationship. We had passed beyond the boundaries that encircled the pupil and the master. But yeah, not just that, but there are also other parts that sort of, remember how I said that, Philip is sort of described as someone who is, doesn't fit really well in any parts of society. Sometimes he would describe his, his friendship with Endo like it is something that is really secretive. Secretive because of the fact that, he is half Chinese and Endo is Japanese. And for them to be seen together outside in the public would sort of be, it could potentially be dangerous as well around that time. But if you really think about it, and coupled with these things, the secrecy of that relationship has probably, in fact, other meanings. And so I find it kind of strange that so many reviews of this book sort of glossed over that fact, when I think that that part of this book is really obvious and I think deserves to be talked about. And not only it sort of becomes a story about someone trying to make a choice because they have issues in finding their own identity in society, but at the same time, I must say that this book is a pretty decent, I almost said wonderful, but I think that this book is not that wonderful. It was nice, but it's a fairly decent writing of a gay relationship, of a queer relationship in a historical setting. So yeah, I guess that's all I want to say in this video. And I'll suppose I chat with you again some other time, and I'll see you in other videos. So take care. Thanks for watching, and if you're new here, if you want to subscribe, please feel free to do so. If you want to like this video, feel free to do so as well. Comment if you have anything to say. Have you read this book? If you like it, what did you like about it? If you dislike it, why? Or anything else you want to say in the comments below. If you want to give an emoji or something, So anyway, I shall see you again. This is an awkward goodbye. Bye.